Call a special meeting to order. Approval of the minutes from 2/6, February 6, 25.
Make the motion, we approve the minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Any questions, anything anybody wants to add? Call a special meeting to order. Approval of the minute.
Wow. Like Twilight Zone.
That's the delay you get.
He's got us on a 3-second delay in case I'm out of control.
All those in favor?
Put it on the 5.
Opposed? Public comment?
Excuse me, can you wait a minute?
Yes.
Because I just lost the agenda.
Need one?
No, I mean in here.
Okay.
When you get a chance, I would add John to the members list. I mean,
Yeah, we done.
oh, you already did. Okay. It's late.
Okay, I'm good.
Public comment?
Good evening. My name is Stephanie Tatro. I live on Great Hill Road here in Portland. I just had one question that I couldn't find from last week's meeting. The architects had indicated that the size on Brownstone Intermediate wasn't right. It was off by about 6,500 square feet, but they didn't say in which direction it was off. Was it too big or too small? And I think that has a material impact on the calculations. So if you guys could follow up and find out in which direction that variance was, I think that would be helpful. I couldn't find that information in the slides from last week. Please.
Smaller.
So
The school is smaller than the measurements in their report?
What's that?
The school is smaller than the measurements in their report?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
No, when they found those, they changed their
The original,
estimates, the original one.
she's referring to the original reports had it at like 68,000. They lowered it to like 61 and change or whatever it was to reflect what it actually was. Say that again? Sorry about that. I believe the original report had it at like 68,000 and they lowered it to like 61 and change, if I remember.
6392.
There you go. And
That
that was
should have changed their calculations on the new report.
absolutely. Yeah. She wanted to make sure that it wasn't going up. Valid question.
Right.
Any other public comment? Anybody on Zoom? Discussion on sightlines report? Anybody have anything on that?
Is that where we're gonna go over all the facilities?
Good, I guess, yeah.
I'd say we
I
start
mean-
with Bob. So
So, yeah, I mean, this is really what we wanted to do. So I spent a considerable amount of time, looking at the sightline reports and going through, and I only was able to really look at Brownstone first. I just didn't have the time. It's pretty, as you could see, it's a very in-depth report. The way it was done, I could see their method of trying to find or go through the entire complex to see and make sure that they covered everything when they were looking at, and that particular report is all capital improvements. So what I did was I tried to prioritize their list and look at really what, in my mind, and only my mind, and I'm not an architect, but I do have some engineering background. Really what we would have to be able to retro that school for the future for education. And I have quite a big list that I broke down out of the existing report. And as I go through my numbers, of course, my numbers are estimates that I just threw some contingency on those numbers because the report that we have and the numbers that I was looking at is coming up on 5 years old. There was a considerable jump in material costs in that period of time while we were going through COVID. So I tried to include some of that, but really I think my numbers they're conservative. I wouldn't say they're certainly on the high side, but it's some of the increases that I gave to the numbers that were given to us, I think are pretty close. To be perfectly honest with you, the numbers that we will be hopefully receiving next week, I'm sure will be much more accurate because the architects and engineers will have some historical data and some data based on schools that are bonding out now or being bid on now. Just like he had mentioned, there's a school that's very similar to Brownstone. So very interested to see what those numbers would be. But if I was to go through my list, including topics such as electrical, the boilers and HVAC, including chillers and or DX systems or split systems for the addition of AC, the asbestos abatement in all of those areas, interior piping, plumbing, including sewer that needs to be done based on the age of some of the stuff that we have there, just for new connections at the Fernco's and things like that to renovate bathrooms. Those would be new service lines, drains if needed, appliances and ADA compliant stuff, which is petitions and toilets and stuff like that. Your roof is included in there, and it would only be, and I only looked at the flat sections that maybe needed to be done. We have the roof that was prepared under the new solar panels, which, by the way, we should think about because in some of the suggestions that we have, that's the area of the school that we're demoing, and I don't know what that does with our solar portion of our contract.
Great point.
So that kind of just stood out with me. You know, chimney, I looked at the gym. There's, if that's going to be used, the bleachers have to be updated, where we've got to look at the floor, all that stuff. And that was really all pinpointed in that particular list. I didn't even look at retroing, didn't even get into just doing basic renovations of the classrooms once we decide what those would be. But very quickly, I got in the range of $12 to $13 million. And I was happy myself because when I went back and finally looked at one of the original capital plans that not only Sightline put together, which was in the area, 10 million or whatever. Fryer looked at those numbers and I found a report going back on the capital side of that. They were in the tune of about 12. So we're there. The one thing I couldn't do is when we talked about demoing, drainage, and parking lot improvements. These are some of the big numbers that I kind of threw some numbers in there, but those are really undetermined for me. It's very difficult for me to do that without blueprints, but that's me going through that. I mean, we could simply go through line items the same way, but what I did was I pulled those line items out and said some portion of that needs to be done or it doesn't. Like I didn't include any kitchen fixtures for a cafeteria because we just purchased some new items. But with that said, I am not, I don't know based on what we would need for a cafeteria, if those would work and if they would work for the number of kids. So there might be some adjustments there. So those are difficult things to look at when you're just looking at your schematic on paper.
The big ticket stuff, Bob, because 12 to 13, that doesn't sound out of the ballpark. I think the Sightlines was 10-3.
Right. For
So,
5 years.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I think you're probably right there. So my question would start being, okay, the roof. If we do that, we're entitled to 50% security. we're entitled to 100% if we do these things according to Fryer. Certain HVAC, obviously same thing. So I'm curious what those ticket items. So maybe we need
You have some
Fryer.
big ones here.
Yeah, maybe Fryer needs to help us figure out what we get back out of that number.
So Ben, I can point you to
Yes.
the capital improvements estimate prior gave the previous committee that has that number. And it's interesting that you landed at 12 to 13 million because
Yep.
what they had estimated was 12.5 million for Brownstone for
Yep.
capital improvements. And they broke it out cost to state of
They did.
2.2 and cost to town of 10.3.
Right.
Right.
And some of that,
But the
I
funny
know there's
thing-
stuff in there,
the
Ben,
funny thing
that
is
I didn't even
Those
hit.
same numbers, and I asked
So I
Fryer
tried
when
to
he's
hide.
here, were inaccurate.
Right.
Remember, I pointed out to him that the numbers didn't add up.
The
Yes.
cost to state and cost to the
Yeah,
town.
were inaccurate because I pointed out to him, if you take 50% roof reimbursement and you take the HVAC at 50%, the number was higher than the 2.2. That came out to 2.4, and I didn't even include security. And he goes, oops. So the point is the numbers didn't add up, and they still don't add up using those numbers.
I don't think we get any money for roof.
Roof, as long as
replacement
you,
Under
Complete.
30 years old. Is that correct? We talked about that back.
No, so I did,
I think a roof has to be 30 years old. No?
no. you
I
just
don't
have to-
think so.
You have to
So-
upgrade it. You have
right.
to.
It has to be a complete restoration
And an
yeah.
upgrade. It has to be an
It
upgrade.
is.
So we have to add
It is.
more insulation, foam, blah, blah, blah. And we should.
Yeah,
So
Absolutely.
you do.
spending that kind of money,
Absolutely.
we'd be
Absolutely.
fools not to.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
we just did I have current quotes on Gildersleeve and Valley View.
Okay.
We GPS those, we did laser measurements on those roofs. And we have current measurements on those roofs and current prices as of a month ago. And when I say that, they have to be done to state and local codes. Of course, we know that, but the guidelines for SD reimbursement add an awful lot, which is the insulation, which is get you to that 20 or 30 year.
Right.
So those prices are high, but they also include the 51% reimbursement. So that is the fact. We can get that. But we have to meet these guidelines to do that. And sometimes those guidelines force that cost up a little bit just because you're doing that little extra.
Absolutely.
Because they're not going to give you money unless the roof's
That's
going
the
to
right
last.
to do it.
And I don't blame.
100% if we can make the roofs more insulation, I
Right.
think it's a no brainer.
So I'm currently working on a number for Brownstone. Okay, because we have to look at the slate.
So he mentioned that there wasn't a lot of work to do on the slate, the brownstone and the brick. I don't know if you're on the same page as that.
Waiting for that report.
Okay.
They did a very good look. They're going to come back again.
Yeah, I did see a few. I
Recommend
did see a-
repairs
right.
versus
I saw a few.
replacement, but
Oh.
yeah.
And that's normal. So I think the envelope, so in your 12 million, we utilized the new windows, all that, correct?
Yeah, I didn't include those.
Okay.
Nope.
How about the bathrooms that down in the gym? Because they're in here, there's close to $1 million.
Yep.
And is it true we can't change in them?
So they're pretty bad.
No.
Oh, can you
can't have
change them?
children changing in at that age. Is that true?
Oh. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Our kids don't change for PE.
Okay,
for
so
in
then-
third and
Right.
fifth
Then
grade.
it's- then
It's
it's
a
the-
place to store their
Okay,
stuff.
so
I
they
don't know
say
if
we
we need
probably
to
don't
put
need-
showers in
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Didn't include that.
So we probably don't need a
Have
million.
a question mark on
Yeah.
that, right?
Make sure that Darcy is unmuted if she has a.
You're-
I think
that
we
is
might have a
correct.
Question to
Yeah,
ask.
because that, to me, that really jumped out. The other brownstone, I was like,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute. We're not using locker rooms as such. Don't get me wrong. We should paint them and make them pretty and blah, blah, blah.
So for that,
Yep.
I have a question mark. It was like $1 million.
Yeah,
And I circled mine at like 250,000 to renovate lockers and space.
yeah,
Question mark.
which seems more real if we're not going to be utilizing them
Mhm.
as,
Did sixth graders change for gym?
No, at the middle school they do, but
Right.
in the elementary school level, kids don't change for PE.
so if we are going to go through the list and come up, and I thank you, Bob. I think you did awesome.
Get us there
So,
somewhere.
I mean, basically in the future, this committee, we have a couple roads to go down. We've already gone down the road of the big school at the high school. We know that's 68 million, 34 plus than the high school and all that. So we know all those numbers. We now know what it's going to cost to renovate approximately 2 schools, which I think it was a little, I think the 30,000 foot view isn't necessarily the right for our town. That was the quote he used. using Valley View as an example, and I know, Bob, you mentioned a few smaller classrooms for special classrooms at that school, and there are a couple smaller ones, but the real classrooms are 13. And the way the building's built, you're not going to take any square footage when we revamp it or whatever from the gym. You're not going to take any square footage from the CAF. You're not going to take any square footage from that media center we added on the back just because of the funny shape and all that. I just don't see how we gain another dozen classrooms without a major addition at Valley View, even though he said, no, we don't need to do that. And I find that hard to believe because in the last presentation years ago with Lou Pear, Valley View was getting a 2-grade addition put on it in order to keep it. So I don't know how all of a sudden the square footage is better. I struggle with that right now. So I get, $1,000 a square foot. We can throw the dollar amount at the wall. We can do anything. And that's an accurate statement. But I don't know if that's necessarily the best approach when we're talking about some of these buildings here in town. If we were going to keep Valley View, why not keep the corridors, keep where the load bearing walls are, all this, blah, 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 because that could drive the cost down tremendously. So we've already seen the renovate to new numbers for 2 of the schools. What I'd like to do is we have to go through the list for the other schools. And Bob, thank you. I want to personally thank you as a taxpayer, not just as another board member, but just your numbers at the high school. And I eventually want to go over that with the high school, middle school. Those were massive numbers and you're getting them down to a realistic number, at least what you said. And I won't hold you to it because obviously there's things outside of your control, but we need to go through each school. We need to figure out what we need to do at each school, if it's an option, and come up with a genuine number. Because in my opinion, we have to create a product that's going to meet the needs of the town for 20 years, give or take. And I think we need to go through this report, figure out what we need. When I left last time, I went and pulled, I had them. I went and reread the assessor's cards and I'm kind of shocked. One of our schools is a B plus, I believe. One's a B minus and one's a C plus, according to the assessor. Fryer came in at like C and C plus, so they're a slight difference. But I find it hard to believe we're going to talk about essentially tearing down massive wings and getting rid of this when these things are already in okay shape. We have deferred maintenance for too many years. Our buildings are in need. And I want to come up with a plan with this committee that we can get some stuff done and actually have schools that don't leak. And one more thing before I forget, Bob, at the Brownstone, I was able to draw, we could put another driveway in, save the basketball court, believe it or not, come in through the tennis court, move the playscape to where they're parking now, still have a fire truck access through there for minimal money. And then your courtyard, brick it up, get rid of the basement, pitch it out like you were mentioning. That's more you than me. I'm going by what you guys said out to get water out of there. And I know you can, whether it's in a drain or sheet flowing out of there. So bottom line is, I think all the major things that I've heard so far on our facilities are fixable. We have C's to B's for buildings, according to Fryer and according to the town records. I don't know how we got down the path of, well, no, I did. Let me take that back. I do know how we got down the path. Sometimes renovating to new, if you had to go to that full standard, sometimes building new is cheaper. I can acknowledge that. I don't believe we're to a point where we're going to break a 50% threshold, ever triggering that. And we can make sure that we don't. So we either have to put the hat on that we're not going to break the 50% threshold and we're going to stay below that and we're going to fix everything and address every need in every school, or we're going to all have to sit around and powwow and figure out that we're going to spend $50 million and renovate 2 buildings, or, these are the conversations we're going to have to get to. But I think in order to get there, we do have to go through the buildings and decide what we're doing. I don't want to be a pain, but I think at some point we have, those are our paths, and whatever. I'm just one person here,
Right.
so
And
let somebody else talk.
the very important thing that we have to consider also is how these are funded and how long it's going to take, depending on what we decide to do, because that's going to greatly influence the cost over time. If you're looking to renovate with capital, however you do it, in a piecemeal mode or operating out of the schools, which we certainly won't be able to do through the whole abatement process. It's just, there's too much of it in all those schools. Unfortunately, where it is, it's not how much it is, it's just where it is. It hangs over everybody's head. You can't occupy stuff like that. It's just too difficult. It's easier to get in and out. I think it would be more cost. It would take longer than if you were able to get in with no
Well, that's why
no bodies and abate.
we're fortunate that we have a spare building, and I still think you're right, we have to do that.
Right.
Whatever we
Right.
do, whether it's renovate or renovate to new, or we're lucky, we're in a position right now, we have functioning buildings, we can shift grades around, and I agree with you, Bob, anything to drive the cost down and not expose the children while we're doing,
Right.
whether it's Gildersleeve first or whatever building people choose. That's, I think, is the correct path.
I
And
mean,
we're-
I
we're
need
fortunate
to
we can.
see, I mean, we all need, not, because my numbers are, they do this really every single day for a living. I just tried to zero in with my background as close as we can get to a number. And I think we're there, but there's a lot of stuff that, I don't know. Could be big numbers on there, which could, change it from 12 to 14 to 16. You don't know, with escalation over time, depending on when we finally get a shovel in the ground, because we've still got a lot of time to even decide to make these happen. So the numbers are still going to work up, but
Hey, Bob, can I ask you a
I
question?
just had a quick question too.
Go ahead.
I just was wondering, Bob had mentioned the parking lot at Brownstone. Is the parking lot and the cage, that's where the kids play in the playscape, isn't that owned by the town? That's not part of the school property, isn't it? That's different.
The parking lot is owned, well, it's all owned by the town, but that's part of the school. The cage area, as you call it, or basketball, tennis courts, whatever it was in the day, that is a park and rec, paid, maintained and sponsored through them.
Okay, so with that, we can't have a school without, I mean, we would have to think of that logistically then if we were moving grades there to make a playground, but Park and Rec would have to approve it or fund it. That's just something I want to put on the radar if we're thinking about moving all of that. Because it's not technically the schools.
It's not, but there's kind of, I think, always been a mutual agreement that that's the way it's been. They've just always paid for the repairs and maintenance, which right now they are going in for, which we need to know that if we're doing something there and gonna move something before they go
Right.
spend money on repairing that,
Correct.
we need to be involved. Not involved in telling them what to do, but they need to
Yeah,
say, hey,
they're
we're
aware of
thinking about doing A, B, or C, and so we don't go spending money and then ripping something apart.
Correct. That's all. That's all.
Well, and part of the it's a good point, Darcy, because one of the recommendations that Fryer was making last week in their presentation, I mean, and we don't need to debate maybe we could go back and forth about whether to take down part of that back part of the building or not, but one of the recommendations was to try and create green space, playground space closer to the school, enclosed by the school as a safety measure for keeping 3rd through 5th graders safer on that Main Street location. Which then would call for rerouting bus loops and traffic through the space where that cage currently is. So that might be a conversation that needs to be had with the Board of Selectmen, Park and Rec to figure out,
Yeah, there's a lot of DOT that goes into that too. Remember, we're on a state road, so you have curb cuts and stuff that have to be approved by DOT. There's a lot of extensive design work just for those curb cuts, other than just, town road. Our regulations are one thing, but so the state gets involved. They'll be involved just because of the location of the school.
And we
For
did go
for
through that
drainage.
years
Oh,
ago.
yeah. Yep.
We did go through
The
that years
sidewalks.
ago, was to move the whole playground area, right? Over closer to the building, and then, have the buses and staff parking would be out where the cage area is now, plus the buses and everything would come in over that way, closer to what used to be the Peterson Oil property, and then come around the back. That was,
Yeah, I couldn't find anything that
Yeah,
was
you know,
formally done
I
on
could-
that,
I
but
could tell you who Billy Unikewicz was on the Board of
Yeah.
Selectmen when that went on, and he was pushing on that big, and I don't know where it ever went. It just kind of seemed to go away, so.
Yeah, I don't think it went into a design stage.
I don't
We didn't have
think it
any
got there.
conceptual stuff.
There
Exactly.
you go.
So no
That's
conceptual.
Billy's drawing or
for
yours?
drainage.
That's mine. That's what I do. So you save the basketball at the back. You put the parking right here, go
Exactly.
through the old tennis court play area. You put the new play area right here.
Mhm.
You make more green space in front of it with a fire truck access through the old curb cut. Done.
I did ask that
Yeah, just
question, and
need
they
both
said like
sides for fire.
Westland has things where, because they have to get like a,
Yeah.
you know, a ladder
Yeah.
truck or something
Yeah.
in there, these bollards just pull right out.
Yep.
And then they can bring right in to get close enough to that building, God forbid they ever needed
Yeah.
to.
Or
Yeah,
they,
you only, I mean, you have to stay out of the collapse zone, so there's
Right.
room for, yeah, we don't, have to get
Just
too
a
close.
question as the newcomer. Now, we're talking about in some of these proposals, potentially moving the play area, play equipment to an area that's closer, more adjacent to the building. And then potentially using what is now the play area as you wrote, Ben, a parking lot or entry access for the buses. Is there any change to the current process? If that play equipment moved closer to the school, does it then become a product owned by the school? And if you have to asphalt that whole area and redirect traffic and parking, if that is still on town-owned and not Board of Education-owned property without the reimbursement, I mean, those are things you have to think about.
The reimbursement percent. I mean,
Mhm.
the town really owns all of it,
I understand that.
you know, they do own.
it's one lot, 3.4 acres, it's
Right.
owned by the town of Portland and
Right.
maintained
Right.
and possession by the Board of Education.
But your point about that
Expert zone.
particular chunk and whether that is school property or town property would impact whether we were able to
reimbursement.
receive reimbursement
Right.
on
Mhm.
which for a full rerouting of the parking lot for safety
Mhm.
reasons would be eligible for
Mhm.
for some reimbursement, I would imagine. So like I said, I think that's a conversation that's
Yeah.
worth
I'm
having.
just not sure if I can understand everything is town-owned, but the state gets involved with the Board of Education parcels and property.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about making changes to the parcels that are not Board of Ed, will the state reimburse you for that?
No, but if it was,
Or is there a way you can
If
get
it-
them to reimburse it for some of it? If it has direct relation to the health and welfare of the kids.
yeah, I'm guessing that the town would need to hand over that chunk to the Board of Education and include that in the school blueprint, in the same way that we were talking about handing over the basement to the town.
Right.
There would have to be an exchange
Right.
if the state was going to consider reimbursement on
But
that.
Darcy's right to flag that question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Carl, is that in the, I don't think we ever gave it to the, isn't that all part of the school? It's always been the play yard for that school, correct?
But it's been through Park and Rec forever. The work that I did always.
Yeah, because the Agliotti Field across the street is Parks and Rec as well.
Yes. that
We
was-
changed
yes.
that years ago.
Right.
Mhm.
I was involved in that.
Mhm.
Is this
That
one's
was to get both of money.
To get clarity on that would be
Right.
good and to understand,
It's,
like you're saying, John, the reimbursement piece
It's the town's.
and
Park and Rec is a department of the town, not the Board of Ed, so it's the
Yeah.
town's property.
But it's still one parcel and I don't know if it's ever been identified differently. I don't know if it was ever given to Park and Rec correctly. My point is, I bet it wasn't.
Agalati Field's different. That's a separate. piece,
Correct.
right?
And that one got cleaned up. This one, you'd be we use it for the school every day.
Yep.
Okay, so let's be real.
Absolutely.
So whether Park and Rec has control after hours or whatever, and it's been helping with the funding, so be it. But I'd be willing to bet that
Well, I think that Park and Rec control came from back in the day when that whole caged area were tennis courts and a basketball court.
Yep.
That was more town used. Now it really is a playground for the children.
we use it every day for the school.
So I'm going back to this list that Bob just talked us through, electrical and pipes and plumbing and HVAC and abatement and bathrooms and ADA compliance and the roof and gym and bleachers. Like, this is an extensive list. How is that not gonna be 50%? How is the state not gonna determine that that is 50% of the building impacted by improvements that would then require code updates? Is there's, I mean, I keep hearing what you're saying, that, you know, we
So
stay on this side of the
portions.
line,
So
but
the
the
answer,
question is like, how is that not 50%? And also,
Yep.
don't we want a building that is up to code for our kids?
Not if we can't afford it. So the short answer
Can't
is
touch it.
they staggered this report for a reason. So if you go back through the report, now keep in mind, these buildings are graded Cs and Bs. They are not Ds and Fs. Our houses, I bet there's people at this table that have a lower grade on their house, just so we're clear what that means. So these are not all to be done in 1 year. That was not what this report is showing us. The showing, it was all the issues that we foresee. I believe it was up to 12 years out. So some of these are going to be staggered. I'll give you the one example. We should do all of the roofs that are required at once on every building, and it's not going to trigger it. Put it to bed. It's simultaneously, we can start working on something else. So we can either be real with this conversation and talk about the hard issues. Here's the hard issue. We can trigger a 50% in a heartbeat, or we can choose not to. That's what this comes down to. So I don't know where the previous board came or where the previous information, that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we're going to talk about, we have a few paths for Portland. Path number one, we know it was 68 million up on this hill, which the voters didn't want, with a cost of 34 million plus whatever the high school was. So call it 40 million. Plus then you don't know what you're doing with the brownstone and Gildersleeve with that number too. So that easily could be 50. We now know renovating 2 buildings to new, plus Bob mentioned there's somewhere around 6 million, and I wouldn't hold you to that, Bob. At the high school, because you've been chipping away at it, and thank you again. That's 50 million. So now we have 2 scenarios that are about 50 million. Now we have the last scenario we need to go through, and we have to do our due diligence. And what it's going to come down to is, what do these buildings actually need? The brownstone from an envelope needs nothing. And I'm being facetious a little bit. It maybe needs 100 grand or whatever in slate repair here and there. Essentially, the outside of that building needs nothing. It needs some inside stuff. We have to decide what we want to do and in what order. And we can probably take the $1 million bathroom or locker rooms out of it. I think that's a fair number, a fair thing to do. And Bob, thank you for putting 250 in. But we've got to do that to every one of these buildings and come up with a real number. Bob, and I want to point this out so everybody gets this. The high school number was, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I remember 11 million and change for everything needed up at the high school, middle school complex, this complex. Bob has been picking away at it. I don't know if Bob's anticipating the 3 million, whatever, but you're going to get it down to 6. So right there.
What does it mean, get it down to 6? Is it taking stuff off that needs to be done, but it doesn't need to be done now? Or is it changing the numbers, or is it, what does that mean, getting it down to 6? Because
That was my
at
next.
some point, if it's taking stuff off, those things will have to be done. And then what is the plan? Because the worst case scenario would be, we're not doing this stuff now. And then in 5 years, oh crap, we have another $5 million worth of
Before
deferred
he answers,
maintenance. And now the town's pissed at us because we're doing,
before he answers,
okay, that's because that was the question I was going to ask before about what is not on this list that in 5 years would be on this list. Okay.
But
Thank you.
my point is, there's also things on here that probably never needed to be on here.
That's
That's why we need to go through
Okay.
it. So they probably wash, but
okay. So
No, yeah, I agree. And that's the difficult part. So what you're doing is we're trying to get to a number, and by doing that, yeah, you lose some things that potentially could be an issue 10, 12 years down the road. So you have to I look at prioritizing those where you get your most important A's. So really, that's exactly what the Sightline report did in its way. It broke it down A, B, C's, and D's. And
here's
it
the
was a
emergency
10-year
stuff,
report.
and then
Yeah.
ideally stuff that could be put into a manageable
10-year, the 7 to 10
actual
year.
deferred maintenance or a
So,
maintenance budget.
We've done work. We spent 1.3 million. It was estimated at about 900,000 for the track. That's done. So those little things chip away. We've done some rooftops that are chipping away. We're hoping to get $1 million back in the potential of a grant for some of the HVAC on the roof. There's $1 million. So it starts chipping away. Do we need 6 million? Do we need 7 million? We probably need 8 million. Could we make some significant changes here for the future with 6 million? I think we can, if we as well get some grant money back on some of those. Securities, even though the school is 20 years old, the security needs to be updated here. We need to get it the same. And been meeting with consultants for a month on security, because it does us no good to go into a project not knowing exactly what we want. So we can put that in the bid. This is how we want to secure our schools. Everybody's on the same platform. Your badge or whatever works at every school. Your cameras work the same way. So I'm working on a platform to do that because security is a big number. I mean,
You can actually hear.
if you look at my number,
Yeah.
you know, and when I start looking at my list of security being half a page, it includes everything, including I put my doors in there and my accesses and my cameras and my fobs and my man traps and how we're going to build the front of the schools to make them safe. So it's all there. That adds up in millions security. But like you said, we have to look at, and Fryer's going to tell us that because that's a really good question. Well, why wouldn't the state, you know, we're making all these improvements. Why don't we get our 50%? A lot of it has to do with, from what I heard, you're either renovating to new or you're doing capital improvements. They're going to give you a lot less on that because I believe that their feeling on that is that you're going to get less longevity.
The other bargaining chip we have is, and Fryer pointed this out, is they'd like to see us give up some square footage. That the state knows we're overbuilt. I was studying our new building the other day. Actually, I got to go over there for a concert. You could literally put in 6 more classrooms in that double high. Don't even get me started. I could gain us 6 more classrooms over there, but we need to give up the basement of that school, and that would impress the state through Fryer. And maybe Fryer, and this is what we also have to find. I don't know what the driving force is, and we're going to find out. If Fryer is a renovate to new company, so be it. If they're not, renovate and repair, well, maybe they're not our people. You know, that's fair too. I have no problem having conversation. If their specialty is renovate to new, and maybe we do one, maybe we do none, you know, we got to run all the numbers. But at the end of the day, if they're not the one, I mean, I'll tell you right now, Bob, if you're able to do what you've done so far, I want to give you $100,000 a year stipend right off the rip for a long time.
You need such in-depth. No, they are, any architectural firm is going to design whatever you want to do. It's your money. So they can do capital improvements every single year for 20 years. They can look at renovate to new. So what they try to do is look at both of those projections and then give you at least a path to go towards. It's all about money for us. We've talked about it forever.
Right.
For them, it's what you want. We'll design to a capital improvement, which they've already have. I mean, we've already gotten capital improvement numbers from them. And those numbers are going to change from renovate to new for 2 big reasons. You're expanding the project over years. So you're going to add interest and soft costs are going to go up, as well as the percentage, which they're experts at, truly are, because they've done it for a long time on what you're going to get back from the state, because Mike is very good with that. The difference between the two. And that's, I'm hoping those numbers next week will really show us all how we get there. The difference between renovate to new, whatever schools they are, versus trying to do capital improvements over time, including just those that are needed.
Right. And that's one of the reasons we should go through this list and take out things like the display cases up here at the high school, $70,000 or whatever it was.
Exactly.
looked
All
that up.
those things add
If
up in
anybody,
that number.
if anybody
that we talked
disagrees with
to
me,
get
we
to 6
we can
million.
talk about that, but they all start adding up.
Yep.
And these are the type of things I mean, this is a lot of money, regardless of what path we pick. It's a lot of money for the town. We have to spend wisely. We have to get a good product. And so far, the other 2 paths, whether it's the big school which got shot down, or whether it's renovate 2 buildings to new, is still a massive number. We have to now get creative or give a massive number to the taxpayer. Those are our options. And I'm not trying to steer this anyway. I'm just putting the cards on the table. We got big numbers. We need to start going through these lists for these schools so Fryer can then say, okay, it's a 5-year deal. You're going to do all the roofs because it's ridiculous to have leaking roofs. Do all the roofs and all the HVAC in year 1 and 2 or whatever. So then, because I think those are the 2 most important things, get the air conditioning, get the quality of life for the teachers and the staff and the kids better, and obviously stop the leaks because that is not good. So
that's exactly what you're saying, Ben, and how you're going to do that through over the years is in that sightline report. The difference between the sightline numbers and Fryer's numbers are the way they go about it and how much Fryer knows about with Downs, who's really the master of the money. as far as putting a price down on estimating.
Yep.
You know, and they have to put soft costs in and stuff, so it gets big. But those are the guys that, or those types of firms, not just them, are the ones that are going to tell you the difference between the long-term capital projects and renovate to new, depending on the condition of your schools. And we all know that our schools are good. We fight every day to keep them good. We still occupy them and teach in them. But we're going to have to figure out what that number is. And to be perfectly honest with you, and I'll put it down on the table, I look at all these numbers and then I go back to the number that the committee worked on for 4 years and got to 28 million. There's a reason for that, because the numbers were so big on the other end. And I came in at the tail end and I was amazed at how big the numbers were. For all the other scenarios that we looked at, which were, I think, 6, when it all got shuffled down to now what do? It was money. Exactly what we're talking now. And guess what won? The 28 million. But it didn't win out there. And that's why I ask every time I'm here, do we have cash towards this project? Because we need that answered. Do we have money towards a bond? Because that makes a huge difference to the taxpayers on what you're going to pay. I ask every time I'm here, and I know they're going to do that. I know they're going to do that. And it's important because we have, Dr. Britton has mentioned savings and consolidation, one school
Yeah.
gone. We have a little bit of savings there. We obviously we're going to be using that towards that unless they slash it and say, no, you're not getting that back. That's just a cut in your operational budget, which would be a disaster. And then what are we doing with the money that's kind of be sitting after the school's paid for this
And-
summer?
And the other big thing that we have, well,
It's
a few
important.
things I just want to point out, so everybody food for thought here. Obviously, the other scenario had trouble because we didn't know what we were doing with Gildersleeve, didn't know what we were doing with Brownstone, hopefully, and I know, Carl, I know you don't even want to hear it, but it is relevant. The taxpayers want to know
Yeah, that
what's
was
going to
part of
happen
that
with it or
decision.
not. And another thing, we, as a town, because we have very little business, the revenue, most of the revenue comes from residents. We've never been good at putting money aside for capital. And if we go down a massive path, we are never getting capital. We're never going to be able to pay our teachers what they should get and blah, 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 and get the kids what they, we have a balancing act to do here. We have to come up with a scenario that everybody can live with, that they're not thrilled with, but they can live with it. At the end of the day, we do not set enough money aside every year. I figured it out. It's like $1 million to $1.5 million is what we should be putting aside for the schools, just in capital repairs over the lifetime of all of our buildings. We're not even close. It's like we're doing this. We're bonding to do roofs and repair, you know. So my point is, I really would like to spend a little time on this list. If somebody could get me a better list where I could actually read everything, we go through it. Maybe we only shave, like you said, Bob, $1 million here, $1 million there, a little thing. But then we can give Fryer marching orders. Look, give us real numbers. Here's what we shaved. We can't shave anything else. Everything's got to stay. We have identified that, and we know the years are fake, lack of a better word. I mean, they were 5 years and we're already 5 years old and we haven't done half, 3/4 of the stuff. So the timeline's kind of generic. So we can easily establish something that is palatable and works for everything and we get a good product. I don't want people to think renovating is a terrible idea. Renovating to new is a great phrase. But you get things like a double wall scenario to get the insulation value. Well, that double wall scenario could also create mold and everything because now you have different temperatures, different moistures, and they've got ways to try to resolve. So it's not always like renovate to new is great. You got no more, it's still that old building all fluffed up. My point is we need to go through the list, figure out what we need. And I think, Bob, you're key to this. I don't even want to pretend like you're not. You 100%, you and Carl, you bring so much. We have a path and we're all going to sit at this table and figure out what we think the taxpayers can handle. And if you think it's 50 million, well, then the decision's already made. Let's put it to, you know, but if you don't think it's 50 million, we got to go through this list and come up with something. That's
So even, so let me just throw the number out and I'll be done. So if we say between the two schools and whatever we select, say it's $30 million of capital improvements. Are we good saying that it's going to take 10 years to do those?
no.
Where are we going to be? Yeah, where are we going to be?
Well, unless you.
Well, I don't think
unless
you can
tell-
do it in 5.
Unless you tell me some of the needs aren't needed for 10, and then maybe we don't put it on the list.
You're going to lose some design work for a year because some of the projects in
I
capital
wanna-
have to have some.
I want to know all the major defects and I want to know the realistic timeframes. And we can make a decision. So,
5 is better.
yeah, no, I think it's absurd. to
And you're
think-
gonna start working on the stuff that you just fixed 10 years ago because
Right.
nothing lasts 20.
Exactly. So my point is if they have a roof on here 15 years out, well, maybe we can drop that and we'll talk about it in 20 years. Because Portland has a habit of, we're pretty good about getting 30 out of a
30
20-year roof. We're real good at that.
You gotta build in the
So,
code now, so you're gonna get. 30.
Those are the things that once we get our hands on this and we actually start steering this conversation to reality that we might not be able to afford, renovate to new. And it's not, I'm not saying bad things at this table. I'm just saying reality. We have to start coming, hammering through this list and figure out what we need.
Let me say something.
Please.
This committee ever consider, I look at this number of $40 million, right? And say, no way. I don't think in my wildest dream that this will ever pass. So I've been driving through parking lots, looking,
Knocking down
even though I've been
buildings.
around these places a lot, I just look at different stuff. I like the reports, the way they go. Would we ever consider, just a thought, renovate one building to new
Mhm.
and then take another building and do it with capital work, like you're saying, Ben, with the roofs? Let's secure the building up, get it waterproof,
I'm fine-
call that
I'm
right off
fine
the
to
bat.
Entertain that. I'm
Okay,
fine to entertain
you
that.
know, just think about this. I'm not trying to take us down a road that nobody wants to go, but reality is looking us in the face. If they wouldn't approve whatever that last referendum was, I'm finding it hard that they would approve this. So I'm looking at some of that and saying, okay, the two biggest expensive buildings to renovate as new is Brownstone or Gildersleeve. Valley View would be less, not much less. So could we take one of the big tickets? When we think about that and say, okay, let's renovate one building to new, the one of the three, and then the other option, do it, I hate to say it this way, do it on somewhat of a capital budget with, a deadline in there saying, okay, at this point, the rest of that building has to be renovated to new. So anything we did, like for an example, if we put a new roof, just say we took Valley View and renovated it, not to new, but we did that one through capital, right? It's the smallest of the three. I'm not saying that's,
No, we hear you.
you know what I'm saying?
Yes, you're right.
And then we turned around and did that and just said, okay, we need to put a roof on it right away. We need to get, the fresh air into the building. We need the certain things, we need to make sure that our security is up to code. The parking lots are absolutely falling apart down there. They need to be redone, but maybe not redone to the plan that was in the other thing right now with a target. Because if we look at our mission here, it's Strategic Capital Improvements Committee. So to me, this goes down the road. So we turn around and say, for an example, school A really doesn't need a roof. And I'm not saying that they don't, I'm just saying, there's a big ticket item we can push that out till 2035. And I'm just pulling numbers out of the sky by saying that. How does anybody feel about that?
Honestly, Carl, I think
It's a good option.
that's the way I've been thinking about it and the way we have to approach it, whether we like it or not. I always compare this to, as Ben said, we have a very small group of taxpayers in this town.
Right.
And for the beautiful town that we live in, the one downside to this beautiful small town is that a very small group of people saddle the burden for everything. And beyond what folks are spending for this, we have fire trucks, we have police protection.
That's right.
We have town crew and maintenance. We have all these other things that we have to do, not to mention to meet the contractual requirements that we have for all of our agreements with our staff, whether they're at the Board of Education or the towns. If you are an average family with 3 kids and your house suddenly needs a new furnace, a new roof, and vinyl siding where it's leaking, not everybody, very few people have the ability to do all three of those at once. They're gonna sit down at the kitchen table and figure out, how do I prioritize? Which do I do? Look for the best price and do it. And I think that's the way we have to think about this. And I had been thinking, your idea is one of those potential ways to do
And
it.
I think in the interim, if we chose that way, and again, I'm not saying we have to, or if we went along, that we pick away if we can get our hands on some of that money, or even if it was in the bond,
Mhm.
and we said we needed upfront $5, $7, $8 million to get that other building in this place in shape.
Mhm.
And at the, by the time the whole design and everything is done for the renovate to new building, maybe we can have that other stuff underway or partially picked up.
Well, it's not too big. It would also, and it also would include the high school and middle school.
I
Yes.
think,
Can't
and our
leave that
capital,
out.
and again, our capital strategic planning thing
Sure.
here is what it says. We have to figure this whole thing out. Once we figure it out, financially, it's gotta be put together, but then it's gotta be somewhat stuck to. I mean, not right to the minute, because we know, like you say, if a roof is good for 20 years, you push it. That's not just Portland, Connecticut. That's
It's
everywhere.
everywhere.
That is everywhere. Every small town in America has to do that. Every big city has to do that. I don't know. If you want to go around the table, give your opinion on that, what you think, we could.
I gave you mine, and I apologize. I have to
I
go to a
understand.
hearing for 6:05, but I will be back. It's down Main Street.
Okay. Are you bringing pizza?
We're probably leaving it.
So
I think we're leaving. Laura,
What do you want?
leaving at 7. We're gonna,
So that's a
John,
good
we're gonna
point.
be out of here at
So-
7, just so you know.
that's a good point.
This is gonna be 10 or 15 minutes. I will be back.
Okay.
Just wanted to let you know.
So-
Thank you.
So if you're,
Can we go around the table here and discuss that? Bob, go ahead.
so that's a good point. Yeah, I think Ben might have mentioned that last meeting. So if you were to pick, don't even put names on it. If you're just looking at dollars, if you were to pick the lowest school or the cheapest school, I should say, to renovate to new, you're looking at about 39 million, per the last estimates that we have. So now we would need to pick the capital long range. Okay, that would be the cheapest. You're still getting up there. So say it was 6 million or 8 million, right? Then you're adding what? Another 6 million on for the secondary school. So we're kind of there.
I know.
The only thing
I
that's
know.
not part of those numbers is, I don't know, I guess there's reimbursement off the 38. So 50% of that would be gone. The rest of it would be in the 28 range. I've been hearing for capital improvements,
So if you want to hear the numbers, so
depending on the security and the roofs and stuff, but that's, you're not going to get all of 51% for sure on that school that you're going to do capital improvements over time on.
So if we do full capital improvements, and I'll use Gildersleeve because we've talked about
Full cap.
yeah, because that one is a 4-grade school already. It meets the classroom requirements. It has 4 grades worth of classrooms. So it has 24 by state statute. So we need 6 per grade because we want to have 18. That's our motto. So you need legally 6 per grade. I know we've had debates, but at least when I was on the Board of Education, that was how we did it. So that school currently, the 24 would work without major reconstruction of the building. So that would be renovate to new potentially. And I'm not saying this is what we're going to do, but that would be about 19 million. And then Bob, if we put the 6 million up here, that would put us at 25 million. And then if we sharpened our pencil at the brownstone and one way or another, we made that 7 million after reimbursements and all that. And that's just our number. That puts you at 32. And then we need $1 million for Valley View if we're going to lease it to Oak Hill or whatever. Then we know what we're doing. Then we have income coming in or turn the boiler on at 50 degrees. I could care less. I want to make sure whatever building we don't use, there's got to be $1 million for it because we're not going to do central school all over again. We need a plan that works start to finish. Every building that the town owns, it's an asset. It has to be a well thought out plan. I don't want people saying, well, you left the building in disrepair and we needed it in 20 years. None of that. If we'll put a roof on it, whatever building doesn't get used, we'll put the boiler at 40 degrees and we'll walk away and we'll spend 50 grand a year to heat it if we had to, or we'll lease it out or whatever, to whoever. So that would put you back at the 33, 34 million. If we went down that path, that's something that, and I'm not, hey, I'm sitting here I'm sitting here trying to figure out numbers myself. I don't know what's best for Portland. I just know, I'm with you, Carl. 40 million's not flying. We would be kidding ourselves, and I'm not even sure 34 million will fly, but I would like to, and this is where Dr. Britton could help us with the number. Pretend we settle on a 34 million. Well, I think we already had that number. Break it down, what that increase, I think you mentioned, what does that actually mean to the taxpayers? I think these are so important. If we're going to work backwards, we need to be able to have these conversations. What does that actually mean? And maybe it's too high, but maybe it's not. But so we need to start somewhere. And if it is too high, we're going to just take out this list and we're going to go through it again and we're going to renovate and we're going to say hi to everybody and move on. You know, these are the only options on the table. You agree, Carl? I mean,
So
But
you're,
one of my recommendations is that one building gets renovated to as
We have.
one.
Yes.
That's
Huh?
an option. We have to look at that.
Yeah, we have to.
That's a-
And
I don't
then
disagree with
the
that.
second
I mean-
building, we can kind of,
just went back to Fryer's numbers, $36 million for full capital improvement. Just went back to his numbers for every school.
right,
Estimates.
but that include the million in the brownstone for those bathrooms. We're not going to do it. It included 300,000 for the hoods up here. It included
No, it was,
70,000 for the.
I'm thinking there was some reductions in there because the numbers are down a little more than I thought on that. But yeah, you're $36 million right here for capital improvements a year ago.
And keep in mind, the numbers he put up didn't jive when he said we got 100% reimbursement on safety. We
Right,
got
that could
50%.
drive that down.
Right, we got
Couple
50%.
billion.
And if, keep in mind, he didn't mention in the last presentation, there's an additional, he mentioned it in one of the meetings, 20% for historic building. He never put that number up there for the brownstone renovations. There's a, because it's a,
Square footage.
no, additional, because it's a
Not
historic,
additional reimbursement.
additional-
Square footage.
he said both. So one meeting, he said square footage, and one meeting, he said additional, up to 20% reimbursement, additional from the state because it's a historic structure. I got him to say that.
Okay.
So it's
And
not
but
national,
he said they'll also give you more
So
leeway on
it's
the
state
square footage
or not?
because they don't want you to necessarily mess up.
It gives you a little bump on the.
Yeah,
square footage
yes,
for
so,
always.
yes, yes.
Yeah, I remember that. I
Yes,
don't
that
know
was in the
about
second
this.
meeting.
Is
The
it
one or
just
two meetings
historic
before that,
place?
I got to admit, there's
It's not
a
accurate.
20% up, he said up to 20% for historic preservation. The state encourages it for a building prior to 1950 was what he said. And that, I think we meet
Is
it.
it state? It's not national.
I don't know that prior, that's where the experts come in.
national.
I just retain stuff. I know what people
Could be
say.
state,
I
I
can repeat
don't
it, but
know.
I don't know where it came from.
So it'd be interesting because of all the additions that were put on it. If it was, I wonder what that process
Well,
was.
the additions don't count. He said 1950. He was very clear when he said it. He said you get it, you can get up to an additional 20% for historic prior to 1950. He said 1950. Both additions were after 50.
Right.
So that in my head didn't count the back half, but we may be entitled to something in the front half. And if we are, so be it.
Can I just, I jump in, I one thing. It sounds like this conversation might be 7 days premature.
right.
Yes, it's hard.
I
It's,
think what the group really is gonna need is the capital improvement numbers from Mike next Thursday, right? And then from those, the push and pull can happen about what he's included in those numbers, what can be stripped out, what state reimbursement, those things. Because once you have that next Thursday, and we did get a peek at that, that was $48 million. That's what he threw out there the last time. You can expect it's going to be a little bit higher, but we haven't gone through it item by item and had the chance to, push back in terms of what can be taken out. Obviously, those included air conditioning and that type of thing. But once you have that, right, I think at that point, you have the big idea if we're looking at this just from a dollars and cents perspective and not from a teaching and learning perspective. Because by that point, you'll have a cost from the last committee on, or from last week about what a pre-K 2 costs to turn Valley View into. You'll have from the last committee what it costs to turn Valley View into a pre-K 3 school. And of course, we know what it would cost to turn Valley View into a pre-K 5 school. And now, as of last week, you know what it would cost to turn Gildersleeve into a 3-grade school and what it would turn Brownstone into a 3-grade school for the next generation of Portland students. So next week's numbers that you get are going to give you everything you need. And I think at that point, it's like, put them all up on a board. Like, let's get a whiteboard and throw them all up there. And then you can start to play agenda game and say, well, if we did this and this and move these things around, you're going to start to do what you've been doing is get to those numbers. But Carl, I don't dislike your idea that, hey, let's just say we want to do renovate to new Gildersleeve and all or some of the capital improvements that Mike might bring us next week. But I don't think we can really have that conversation in earnest until we get through next week. That said, I do also think in addition to the numbers, there's an important conversation to be had about teaching and learning, right? Like, you know, I understand money is the most important thing. I get that. But my worry, Carl, and I gotta just be honest, like if we do renovate to a school, you know, what's that other school gonna look like, all right? Because all of our schools, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, are a little uncomfortable right now.
They're not great.
They're a little uncomfortable to teach in, right? They're hot, they're cold, the air's not the
Air
best.
circulation
They're
at all.
they're not great. Like
Yeah.
lots of kids get sick because of stuff, right? So I'm a little anxious that, you know, while I truly want to find a cost-effective way through this, I also want to go back to those priorities and, you know, some of them aren't the scariest. We don't have man traps in some places. We have very thin glass in some places, you know.
To that capital improvements, I just have the question, you know, I have students who have obviously special needs students, like what about ADA compliance? Like some of us, like some of the schools, like we're not even up to the 1991 standard. So like what does that look like?
Yeah.
We would have to bring it up.
Right, because I think and that's a great point, like, so at some point when next Thursday is gonna be a really important night, we're gonna get those numbers, right? They're gonna prepare for sticker shock, we know it's gonna be at least $48 million, that's what it was last time, if you choose to do all three. Within that, you knock those numbers up a little bit, but then pushing back what we can and can't have in those. I think we'll have all of the numbers you need for the various configurations you might want. And then it's time to have that discussion, but also within that discussion, I think, you know, the teachers at the table need to be saying, you know, can we live for another 20 years with the current indoor air quality conditions in some of our schools, with the current security conditions in some of our schools, with the current parking conditions in some of our schools, which I think will inform your thinking about what to add into and what to remove from the considerations. But your idea is not bad. It's just.
No, I do say that when I say, you know, the air quality issue is huge.
It is.
And that would have to be included. If we renovated one building as new, that would be included.
Right.
And if we upgraded the other building as capital, that would have to be, things like that. Man traps, you know, security issues, you name
ADA
it,
compliance.
roofs leaking. Maybe we didn't do
EDAs.
windows
touch
in a
the
certain building right now and we did them down the road in a capital project. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying with that?
100%. And I understand what you're saying, but I
We
think
have to hit
you-
certain targets.
you have to remember your path could easily put us 3 years out still doing this. We have to sit here and we have to put it all on the table. And the reality is, I wasn't part of the last committee. I think you were, right?
Very much.
And we know it failed. So we have to look at this differently. I don't want it to fail. I do not want our buildings leaking for another year. I want to come up with a good plan. I want to address security, which we can. It's all pretty, we can do it. We can address air quality. We can address everything. But you got to remember, if we're just going to let Fryer create a number, I could create a number as high as you want or as low as you want. They put $1,000, give or take a square foot, to rip down buildings and rebuild it. That's okay. We have to sit here and talk about, at some point, we may need to go through these line items, discuss what's part of going to help teaching quality and air quality and everything. And some of these things, quite frankly, just might not need to get done. And then we can address and maybe gain a few things that we missed. I'm sure there's going to be a few more things. I want to be crystal clear. I want to get the best product possible for our teachers and our kids. And I think the proof is our first Blue Ribbon Award school was built in 1932. It's not necessarily the building. It's the teachers, what you pay them, how you treat them, and what you give them. And then they are able to give our children the results that are needed. I'm fearful of Fryer's numbers, and we'll see what he creates.
Bob is very good. I like Bob's numbers. So if I don't like Fryer's numbers, we're stipending Bob.
You're in trouble.
And we're gonna sit down as a town and get the best product possible. When you know, I mean, guys, that's where we're at. So I don't want it to fail, but if that's the path. So, please.
Our blue ribbon teachers deserve a blue ribbon school.
So you bring up another point.
Come on.
We spend the most out of any country on schools, and how's that result coming? Let's put it into the teachers and the students instead. Let's try a new model for Portland instead of what everybody else has done. This whole renovate to new is not working for Connecticut. It's not working for America. Let's get real here. Let's come up with a system that actually produces results for the children. And that's what I'm looking at. So eventually we got to go line by line, take some of this stuff out, put a few extra things in, and let's get a good.
But you gotta understand, Ben, that the state dictates
To an extent, if we include it.
how that goes.
If we renovate-
You and I off the bat, with the sightlines report, they were like, we're not discussing any of this any further till there's an architect on board. And that's how we ended up where we ended up, right?
And that's
They
if,
were like, we won't even look
That's the
at
process.
that's if we
And-
renovate to new.
So.
If we
but-
just go back to capital, then we're done. We're entitled to whatever reimbursement they give us and we move on. We got to see the number. If it's 50 million, well, then we're kidding ourselves at this table. So,
Right.
so
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah, there's
I'm gonna be
a
quiet for
lot
a
of
minute.
architectural and engineering and capital improvements, especially in the school, because you'll never get a CO.
Yeah.
Especially on the fire side. Nope. So.
Yeah, and I could just add, having been on the last committee, the last committee was right to the end, trying to figure out the cheapest option. Right to the end, and the cheapest option that they got to, which was voted on 5-3, was the pre-K 3 Valley View renovated to new and expanded to create room for grade second and third, and renovate to new at Brownstone for grades 4 through 6. But that was the, wall off the basement and wall off the auditorium and give that to the town and only do, and it was at that point, the cheaper option than a pre-K 6 Valley View. The cheapest option that the town got to was pre-K 5 Valley View. But you're right in that it didn't say how much more it would cost to figure out the disposition of Gildersleeve, Weather and Brownstone. That is true. Now, whether that was an additional 5 million for demolition and selling and all that, that's what this committee started working on. That was, the facility study committee kind of punted on that. So that is absolutely true that the $30 million for a pre-K 5 a Valley View, assuming the 56% reimbursement and the ineligible costs becoming eligible, would have been significantly potentially higher, especially if those two buildings stayed on the town rolls for a long time. Right. And that's true.
And I'm not sure about this, but the only thing I would make sure we figure out, I think those old numbers had the Brownstone, because I went by what he mentioned. He had it at 68,000 originally, and that's what was back on that committee. It's not 68,000. And when you take the basement out, it puts us closer. And if we do give the auditorium up or whatever, we're there. So it's a different, they had misinformation. The end of the day, we have the real information now. That school's not as big as we thought, or they thought. That's one of the reasons I questioned all the square footage right off the rip, because I was coming up with a different number and the assessor and I came up with different numbers than what they were working off of. So
Just clarification, though, make
Yep.
sure, don't point.
I'm not
They
pointing at
found-
anybody.
No, but they found mistakes on the,
So did I. Yeah, there still is.
yeah.
Oh, and the
so-
assessor,
yeah.
there's one that.
So they went in and painfully measured all those prints the
Yep.
way they were done to get those proper numbers. So basically, if you're gonna work off of as-built, you're assuming they're 100%.
Yeah.
Not so much.
I'm not
So-
blaming them.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
I'm just
that-
saying, so they
that was-
went to that
Y-
tack
yeah,
to make
and-
sure those
and
numbers were right.
I'll
When
make
you
sure I'm
question
clear that I'm
we go
not,
right back.
I'm
to
not
don't.
blaming them,
I
but
did.
what was presented was not where we're at now. So we now know the numbers. I don't think anybody's arguing that we can get it down to a realistic number for that building. So it's a different, that changes everything. So.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I would just add is, and what, again, next Thursday is a really important night. You're gonna get the numbers, but there's also within this, the assumption that sixth grade is coming to the middle school. I think that the committee took the position of that, but may want to reconsider that, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe if to increase your reimbursement rates, keeping sixth grade in the mix, those might be other things to talk about.
For clarification, we just recommended it eventually get switched up. We
Right.
never said when.
Right.
So at this point, I think
That's not a decision that this committee would.
it was we can make a recommendation, but nobody, to my knowledge, I've been watching the Board of Ed meetings. You guys are doing a great job. I haven't seen anybody discussing shifting that up. And I agree with you. If that's the case, if we're entitled, keep in mind, that's more if we go renovate to new, depending on which building. And so I'm not sure it would necessarily apply, but great point.
I mean, the sixth grade to the middle school is sort of making up for the space overage here.
Yeah.
That is part of the challenge that you have, where you see the overbuiltness.
I mean, my impression, we can revisit that as a conversation, absolutely. My impression from the Board of Education is that there is a real interest in moving sixth grade up, not only for potential savings, consolidation at the elementary level, but also for the educational benefits that relocating the sixth grade to the middle school, and the possibilities that opens up at our middle school. So I mean, we can reconsider that conversation at this committee, but I do believe there is interest at the Board of Education level in proceeding with that at whatever point we're able to.
And I would just say, no, and I do agree with you that, going to the town and asking for $80 million to renovate two schools to new and still leaving one vacant without a plan for that, that's a non-starter. I mean,
But if we did, I vote we send Carl.
all right.
And just,
I'll second that.
That would seem to be, that would be a tough act, right? I
he's
mean,
retired.
Oh.
The rest of us have to work in the right.
wow, that's.
It seems to me, in addition to the conversation about budgets and the money, that it's also, and maybe this needs to wait until after we have presentation and fire next week, but it seems that we also need to have a conversation about the sort of value of each of the school properties and whether because costs are pretty similar between Valley View and Gildersleeve. It seems like it's worth having a conversation about whether there's pros and cons to each of those facilities and properties in terms of education and
I think we also have
possibility
to
for the future.
look at it in terms of the community too, because the baseball fields, I'm a huge Little League family, and my kids used those baseball fields for years upon years when they were in T-ball and coach pitch. And so there's a huge value there, whereas the fields that I don't even call them a field, but the field at Gildersleeve is swampy and gross and never gets used except for field day. So
We're running the mile.
yeah, or running the mile.
So it might be premature to talk about that, but I do think that at some point we probably will want to talk about, Valley View versus Gildersleeve and where we see the most bang for our buck in the long run.
I just want to point out too, that I love that Valley View is part of that whole, the complex, I guess I want to say, like that's a whole campus. Which I think is really nice. as well.
You have to remember with that piece of property down there,
Mhm.
it is the largest piece of
It
property
sure is,
of those three.
right?
So I'm talking about maybe not a discussion at this point, but someday, if that was ever needed to expand, that really is the only place that you can
Yeah.
start pushing things out.
I agree, Carl.
Oh, it is. And that's why I've been an advocate about that from day one, because being on these properties for 20 years, that is a place with a lot of open land.
And a
You
great
start
sledding
going up
hill.
the hill, there's a lot of ledge there, but that's okay.
It's all done.
So
And that brings me to my point. That's one of we're in a better position 25 years from now, if that is the one that we're closed and renting out, if that's gonna be where our new big school is gonna go. then you don't mess with anything. That's my whole thought. I don't want to sell it. I want to keep the ball fields. I think we're in a good position. If Oak Hill or anybody else would like to rent it, so be it. It's our, I just don't see where you're turning 13 classrooms into 24 without the addition. And if that's the case, I want someone to explain to me why there was a proposed addition before and not now. It's that simple. That's what was on the record before. Proposed addition, 2 grades. Why don't we need it now? Something's not adding up. So it's a 30,000 view. I just don't think it quite adds up. That's all.
Anybody else? Chris? All right, so I kind of think we're really at a standstill, so fair enough to say till we go through next week. And
Can I get these blown up so when we do finally go line?
If you go online, they're all linked on the district's homepage and they come out in an Excel.
You're talking to a guy that doesn't go online.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so. Yeah, unless you're gonna do a presentation here and blow it up, I'm gonna need a bigger one.
Well, you got colored, so you can
You can also
do
change the way
this.
it's printed when. you
That would
print
be,
them.
wonderful.
Can
And I'll
can you
come
do me-
visit.
Can we do this real quick? Can you go to the district webpage and put it up there? I want to show them right where it's like. I mean, just, I don't, do you have internet and with a computer?
I don't send emails.
Open.
I'm not
It's
interested.
2025, buddy.
Yeah, yeah. I've made it this far in life and I have no need. I've got people that'll do that.
You got people that do that.
I'm not doing that. So I'm just gonna need a hard copy. Do I get, no,
It's your wife? or
it's
your
not gonna do me any
son?
good. How about I come
I
visit you
know.
at your
There's
office?
something
Sounds
really
good.
cool. He can
You
do a
could do
great
it.
job.
All 5 of them.
Can I show you real quick?
No,
of them have
because it
to
doesn't
go.
do me any good. What's it gonna do me?
You just want to clean.
I just want something I can
Clean
read.
copy, you can see
The
that.
font on that is tiny. That's all.
Well,
Go to the.
like, the font I can't help you with, but.
All right, hey, Dr. Britton, you're no longer needed. He's gonna print it. He can handle
Do you
it.
know where, can I show you where to find it?
No, he already printed his.
Oh, you have it already.
I just put it on a look format.
Oh.
There you, see,
Yeah.
thank you. That's all I was asking for.
How did you fit all the cells in?
I reduced.
Just
You
reduce
don't need
it.
some of those.
Cut, just deleting some of the cells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
some of
Well,
this.
I can print it that way too. You wouldn't have all the detail of it.
Now you can print it that way? No, forget it. I'm taking up.
You're gonna be missing something.
Ben just wants the numbers anyway.
Okay.
I want to know what it
Would
is
you be able
in
to
the
see
dollar
what
amount.
the things are like yeah.
Yeah.
I need to know what they are in the dollar amount. and We need to go through each one eventually. That's all.
does anybody else have anything else? Public comment?
Hello? Is anyone there?
Yes. go ahead.
Yeah, so this is Mitch Gilbert. I listened to the whole hour and I hope you all have additional hours that you can spend time on this, but I think that by and large, you had a wasted hour. One, you need to have all of the alternatives listed with concrete numbers. All you did tonight was conjecture. After you have those concrete numbers, you need to have a decision tree to allow you to come to a unified conclusion. After you have that, most importantly, you need a plan on how you're going to market this to the town. You did a horrible job the last time. This time you have to do a much better job. That's about it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mitt.
Anybody else on?
The driveway's black ice.
Hello there.
They said they slid. It's very dangerous.
I got to leave the meeting here.
Okay.
Okay, Beth Anderson, 44 West Cotton Hill Road. First off, I want to make sure as you guys are thinking about leaving the 6th grade in like BIS or something like that to increase your square footage allotment. What happens if you move those kids in 5 years over to the middle school? Is the state going to come back and say, oh, we want all that money back for that square footage? I believe in addition to the educational benefits of moving them to the middle school, there were financial benefits as far as the possibility of reducing one of the bus routes that Dr. Britton can correct or elaborate more, but I think that was like $70,000 or $80,000 savings a year. So again, think about those impacts. I also want you guys to be thinking about the priority versus non-priority projects. I believe Fryer said last time that the non-priority projects you can submit for at any time, so you're not stuck with that June deadline. So if you started picking away at some of the non-priority things like the roof, the security, I believe those were all non-priority according to the state. Let's get that going. Figure out which two buildings. Again, I think to me, Ben is right. Let's look at the number of classrooms. We keep talking, you keep talking square footage, but square footage does not equate to the number of classrooms. That some of our classrooms are oversized, some of them are smaller. The state suggests their sizing based on 25 students per class for the classroom sizes. That's not what Portland is targeting for their classroom sizes. So for our classrooms to be a little bit smaller, that should be fine. Let's look at those bigger picture items. And yeah, again, the Ben's point that I do remember that there was something said about allowances for the older buildings having more flexibility in the spacing. So that's important to be keeping in mind, as well as lost what I was going to say on my last one. Oh, demoing things. Think about if the percentage that you're losing because you're overspaced, if you're losing $1 million because you're overspaced, but it's going to cost you $1 million to demo that section, why not keep it? So make sure you're looking at that as well. Thank you.
You. Anybody else?
Carolyn Freeman, 12 Rose Hill Road. And this is what I have to say is very premature. All I would ask, and I agree with the gentleman on the phone, is I think the marketing of this left a lot of questions to the Portland community. And I think that might be one of the reasons that the proposal did not pass. And I think you have to take into consideration people who read, they go online, people who don't go online, some people read the River East, some people like to have a community meeting or whatever. So you have to kind of look at what you do in a school, look at everybody's, there are different ways that people learn and gather information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love those movies. Good. Yes. Like.
Stephanie Tatro, Great Hill Road. I just wanted to point out that in the last committee's report, the executive summary indicates, as at the conclusion of nearly 2-year-long process, the Facility Study Committee voted 5-3 to recommend the following. 1, decommission Gildersleeve Elementary School. 2, extend and renovate to new Valley View Elementary School to create a grades pre-K through 3 facility. 3, renovate to new / alter Brownstone Intermediate School to create a grade 4 through 6 facility. 4, apply savings from the consolidation of schools to fund an annual capital improvement budget for the Portland Secondary School and Town of Portland. This is what the committee recommended. This is not what we voted on. So I think that needs to be very clearly understood. What they recommended and what we voted on were not anywhere near the same thing. So let's think about the time that committee invested and the recommendations that they made, the 2 years that they spent looking at our schools, studying what we needed, looking at all the data that you have available. I think we need to capitalize on that work that was done, because there was a lot of value in that perhaps has not been carried forward from when the referendum failed last time. I do agree that we need to have a realistic number in terms of what this town will and will not approve. I also think we need to keep in mind I like the idea of renovate one to new and do a second school in a capital improvement process, bless you. But I think that having a schedule that we can more or less stick to is also a good idea. And the other thing we need to remember is if we are doing these capital improvement projects a year at a time, we won't bond that money until we need to spend it. So the inflationary costs need to be examined with the savings in our interest payments that we won't incur because those dollars have not been drawn down. So, there's a lot of magic math in this. And I think we just need to be mindful of that. I personally think that we've already taken the hit on not putting the sixth graders at the middle school, high school complex. And to the extent that we can keep them in these two schools that we are talking about renovating to new or renovating construction wise, I think we can get more dollars by keeping those kids there and utilizing the square footage that we have in the two schools that we would keep. And I do think it's really important that we have a positive plan of explanation for the building that would be decommissioned, because I think that that was not clear in the last referendum as to who would incur those costs and what they would be. Because I think to Ben's point, it's not that we're looking to sell that building, but somebody has to pay to keep the boiler at 55 so the pipes don't freeze. And we need to know as a town how that's going to impact our mill rate. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? So before we adjourn, next week, 5 o'clock here, Friars will be here. Because there's conflicts with some people on here that have to leave. That's why we're doing them at 5 o'clock. But so next week, 5 o'clock, everybody already knows that. And
Could we put one of these questions to bed, seeing that two of the speakers, Dr. Britton, could you find out whether there will be, and maybe it's for Fryer, and maybe we ask it at the next meeting, that might be your answer to me, whether there is a reimbursement potential issue by leaving 6. I think we should put that to bed. We should get that answer and we should know what it is.
What, so is there?
So if the first, or one of the speakers wasn't the first speaker, because online was, one of the speakers, West Cotton Hill Road, said they wanted to know if there was going to be pullback, say a couple of years from now or a year from now, we move the grade, are we going to then have to, are we going to be in default of some way? Because now it's not, that's a valid question. I want to know.
Basically, how long does sixth grade have to stay for them to count towards that 125 square feet?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, she summed it up. So I need that answer before, because if there is going to be a problem, well, then we're going to, that's not even going to be, we'll fix that. But we need, that needs to be addressed.
I think what he's gonna say is all that will matter is that. So let's just say if it were the facility study committee recommendation and you turned Valley View to pre-K 3 and left Brownstone 4 through 6, but then got the 50% reimbursement with the 4th grade at Brownstone, did the renovations and then decided to move 6th grade up. Yeah, likely you would be getting your wrist slapped, but I don't know the answer to that. When they do the audits is likely when you'd find out.
I'm not too worried if that's the scenario. Sounds like we would probably be just doing capital improvements there and capital improvements potential up here. So I don't believe it would even come into play, but we need to know that answer. Those were, I just, if I don't get it on the record and get it answered by the next meeting, then I'll.
Yeah, and just one other, it's a good question and we can find that.
It wasn't for me. You give them the credit.
And part of what you also heard was that one of the recommendations from the facility study committee was decommission Gildersleeve, correct. Valley View into a pre-K 3, renovate to new and extend, right? And then Brownstone 3-5, renovate to new / alter. The reason that it was / alter was because the determination about whether it's alterations, which is sort of like capital improvements on steroids, or renovate to new, is something that is determined after you submit your application. What you hope is that you get the renovate to new status because that entitles you to the full reimbursement rate. And alterations, if you would get less reimbursement, because alterations is just capital improvements and more, like on steroids, essentially. But you don't know whether it's renovate to new or alterations until the state reviews the application and says, I think the standard was, it's cheaper to build new, no, cheaper to do renovations to new than to build new. That was the way, right?
You got better reimbursement.
Correct, you get the full
You
reimbursement.
get the 51% as opposed to what, 25%? Is that?
Right, it was like.
And the other thing we should be clear, because obviously there's people listening online and that's great. And I think the more people that pay attention, the better. And you brought it up tonight, Jen. So to be clear, if we have an ADA issue, we have to resolve that regardless of what we're doing here as a committee. That's going to be on the town. That's going to be on Bob. So I don't want to use it as a scare, and I don't think anybody is. I just want to be clear that that will be addressed. It has to be addressed by law. We're not playing any games. I want to be clear there. So that's all I wanted to point out on that. That doesn't need to come up anymore because whatever's required, we will be doing. That's simple. So
The other thing we need to do next week is just make sure we follow up with John or Mike Pelton about their board of selectmen meeting next week or whatever. They said they were going to talk about the bonding, if the bonding money that they're making payments towards for the current is going to be carried over. We just can't forget we just need to know. And it's so important to our decision making, and they're on the committee, and we just need to make sure that they had that conversation. In fact, I know, Ben, you're usually at the meeting. Laurel, it would be good. I have conflicts on Wednesday nights, but it'd be good for someone to just be there and just make sure you're there too.
I like the podium. Maybe I'll go.
It's probably not necessary. I'm guessing they're all here every week anyways, but it's just good for,
But great point.
To your point.
just to make sure that they understand how important it is for this
They've
project.
received-
It's not gonna work.
Yeah, the
And-
document that we all received here at this committee, they've also
Yeah.
received from the Board of Education with the Board of Ed budget.
My
So
guess is
yeah.
it's not gonna be an issue, but
It's not-
in case it
surprise.
is, we just have to make sure he comes,
Yeah.
and we have to hear on Thursday night. We're good. We can move on.
And great point, because that's the real money that Bob needs in the interim. To start.
knock off.
Yeah, to start. And you know what?
Part of that.
Yeah, and that's what we need to
That's
do to,
really-
we've got a big animal to tackle here and we're gonna do it one way or another. So I think that's important. Every dollar we spend now, essentially it's giving us two. When you think about it, because we're not borrowing it later. So
Right.
I think that's money well spent. That's,
Yeah.
so you've got my vote, not that I get one.
Yeah, can I just offer one other reflection? One of the people you heard mention, I disagree with him. I don't think that this hour was wasted. I think that if nothing else, this past hour, we all recognize that the $80 million renovate to new option with an unclear what happens to the one school, whichever it is that's decommissioned, is not something that we're going to be able to do. I think that that was a good use of our time. We are all recognizing that going to the town and asking for $80 million without a clear plan for one decommissioned school is not something that would be all that wise. So I think we got there. I do though think that the gentleman's recommendation that he called it a concrete numbers with a decision tree, right? I like that, right? And that's what I was talking about. After next Thursday, when we get the capital improvement numbers, you will have the capital improvement numbers, the cost of a renovate to new and expand Valley View into a pre-K 2, the cost of a renovate to new and expand Valley View into a pre-K 3, the cost of a renovate to new and expand Valley View into a pre-K 5, the cost of a renovate to new Gildersleeve to create a 3-5 school, and the cost of for 3 grades, and the cost of a renovate to new and expand Brownstone for a 3-5 schools. That's all the data you need. And then from there, I think he's right. You can put the concrete numbers down and then start moving those numbers around to see what you're most comfortable with. That's sort of what I was talking about. And I agree with him with that. Like he's calling that a concrete numbers with a decision tree. That I agree with him. That's sort of what I was saying. So I'm optimistic that as of next Thursday, you'll have all of those concrete numbers and be able to start putting them in columns and seeing what makes sense. My only ask is that as you do that, I understand the numbers are most important, but we also have to consider teaching and learning side of it as carefully as we're considering the numbers.
One other thing that, number one, I like Mitch. I think he was the speaker, Mitch Gilbert, great guy. but he also said that we did a bad job marketing it. Mitch, if you're listening, that was the old group. That's not us. We are trying to come up with a good plan and we are gonna then try to be united and market it. So it does go through. So,
And the Board of Selectmen took responsibility for it. I think they've owned that
yeah.
in part too. They recognize that.
Yeah, and another speaker mentioned tonight that, you know, what was the last committee came up with wasn't even what we ended up voting on. So, and there was never a final conclusion on what we were going to do with the other buildings, or at least a realistic path. I don't think we're ever going to have a final conclusion, but we can at least say, this is what we recommend you do with the whatever school.
And I
we
keep
close.
saying it every time I try to post the meetings on the community group just to make sure people see every week. And I keep saying, most meetings, almost all the Board of Selectmen are here. Like, they're way more engaged, I think, this time. So I think when we get to the point of making a decision and then we've already sort of talked about how we might start. I think we're just not there yet. I know people want us to start getting there. We're just not there yet, but we will. We'll be there.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too, that not only the disposition of the two schools was an issue, but people had questions about losing a gym
Yeah.
and traffic flows. And
100%.
there are,
Tons of questions.
we
I
learned a
had
lot
questions.
from that.
Don't forget the 30-year financing.
Right,
That
but-
was a big one.
So, you know, we can always get in the internet wayback machine and pull up the Portland Facebook page.
Yeah.
And cherry pick from that a lot of the questions and concerns that were put out there. And as we market, address them.
I kind of think we have to adjourn because we
Yeah.
went there with that and I don't know that we can just keep going out with the meeting.
I'll make a motion. It's 6:36. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second on that.
Second that.
Seven.
Just
All
like a
those in
sign
favor?
there on it.
Aye.
See you next week.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks, guys.